The municipal building parking lot was almost empty at 7:15 a.m. Richard Nelson pulled his unmarked sedan into a visitor spot, surveying the precinct where he'd be starting as the new police chief in exactly 45 minutes. He'd deliberately dressed down: jeans, a plain hoodie, old sneakers. After 25 years in law enforcement, he'd learned that you see a department's true character when they don't know who's watching. Today, he wanted to see his new team without the polish they'd put on for the brass. Richard locked his car and headed toward the building's side entrance, the employee door he'd been told about during orientation. As he reached for the handle, a voice stopped him cold. "Hey!" "What do you think you're doing?" Richard turned to see a young white officer striding toward him, hand resting on his belt. The nameplate read, Officer Derek Hayes. Fresh-faced, maybe 26, with the swagger of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. "Good morning, officer. This is a restricted entrance," Hayes interrupted, stepping closer. "Public entrance is around front." Richard noted the tone, not just authoritative but dismissive. He'd heard it before, throughout his career, the subtle shift that happened when some officers saw skin color before seeing a person. "I was told I could use this entrance," Richard said calmly. Hayes's eyes narrowed, scanning Richard's casual clothes. "Told by who? You got business here?" "I do." "What kind of business?" Richard paused. He could end this now, flash his badge, reveal his identity, but something told him to see where this went. In his experience, the first moments of contact revealed everything about an officer's character. "I'm here to start a new position." Hayes laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Right. Dressed like that? Try again. I'm telling you the truth." The officer's expression hardened. "You know what I think? I think you're casing the building. Maybe planning something. We've had problems with people like you hanging around." There it was. People like you. The phrase hung in the air between them. "Officer Hayes, I assure you—" "Hands where I can see them," Hayes ordered, his voice rising. "Now." Richard complied, raising his hands slowly. Around them, other officers were arriving for shift change. A few glanced over, but most hurried inside, not wanting to get involved. "Turn around. Face the wall." Richard's jaw tightened, but he complied. He felt Hayes's hands roughly patting him down, far more aggressively than necessary for a routine check. "You got ID?" "In my back pocket." Hayes yanked out Richard's wallet, flipping through it. "Richard Nelson," he read aloud. "Address says you're from out of state." "What are you really doing here?" "I told you." "Save it." Hayes tossed the wallet back at Richard, letting it fall to the ground. "I'm going to give you one chance. Pick up your wallet, get in your car, and get lost. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem." Richard slowly bent to retrieve his wallet. As he stood back up, Hayes stepped even closer. "We don't need your kind making trouble around here." "Understand?" Richard met his eyes. "My kind?" "Yeah. People who don't respect the badge, who think they can go wherever they want without consequences." Before Richard could respond, Hayes did something that crossed every line. He stepped forward and spit directly in Richard's face. The world seemed to freeze. The wet insult dripped down Richard's cheek as other officers nearby stopped, stunned into silence. Hayes smirked, clearly expecting Richard to react with violence, giving him an excuse to escalate further. But Richard didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and slowly wiped his face, his eyes never leaving Hayes's. "Officer Hayes," Richard said quietly, "do you know who I am?" Something in his tone made Hayes hesitate. "Should I?" "You should. Because in about 30 minutes you're going to wish you'd asked that question before you opened your mouth." Hayes's confidence wavered for just a moment. Then he recovered, pushing his chest out. "Is that a threat?" "No, it's a prediction." Richard walked past Hayes toward the building entrance. Hayes grabbed his arm. "We're not done." Richard turned, and for the first time let a hint of his authority show through. "Remove your hand." Now. Something in his voice made Hayes let go. Richard continued into the building, leaving the officer standing confused and uncertain in the parking lot. Inside, Richard headed straight to the chief's office. Captain Sarah Morrison, the interim chief, looked up from her desk. Chief Nelson, you're early. I didn't expect you for another half hour. Change of plans. I need you to assemble all personnel in the main briefing room. Everyone. Right now. Morrison stood, concern crossing her face. Sir, is everything all right? No, Captain. It's not, but it's about to be. 20 minutes later, the briefing room was packed. Officers in various stages of preparation, some in full uniform, others still in civilian clothes. Richard stood at the front, still in his hoodie and jeans, still wearing the humiliation Hayes had inflicted. Whispers rippled through the room as officers tried to figure out who he was. Hayes stood near the back, his face pale as a recognition began to dawn. Captain Morrison stepped to the podium. Attention, everyone! I'd like to introduce our new police chief, Richard Nelson. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Officers who'd walked past Richard that morning looked sick, but no one looked worse than Derek Hayes, who'd gone from pale to green. Richard stepped forward. He didn't wipe the dried spit from his face. He wanted them all to see it. Good morning. I know this isn't the typical introduction for a new chief, but nothing about this morning has been typical. He gestured to his face. About 15 minutes ago, one of your officers spit in my face. Why? Because he assumed, based on how I was dressed and the color of my skin, that I was a criminal. He didn't ask for ID properly. He didn't attempt de-escalation. He went straight to aggression, intimidation, and finally, assault. The room was silent. Hayes looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Now, some of you might think I'm here to make an example of Officer Hayes, to publicly humiliate him the way he humiliated me. Richard paused, letting the tension build. You'd be wrong. Officer Hayes humiliated himself. He humiliated this department. And most importantly, he revealed something I need to address immediately. He pulled out a tablet, displaying statistics on the screen behind him. In the past 3 years, this department has had 47 complaints filed against officers for racial profiling. 47. And do you know how many resulted in disciplinary action? The room waited. 0. Because complaints went to supervisors who either ignored them or handled them internally, which is a nice way of saying they buried them. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. She'd been part of that system. That ends today. Immediately. We're implementing body cameras for all officers, no exceptions. We're creating an independent review board for complaints. We're mandating bias training, not as a one-time seminar, but as ongoing education. An older officer in the front row spoke up. Sir, with all due respect, one bad incident doesn't mean the whole department is— One incident? Richard interrupted. I've been here less than an hour, and I've already been assaulted by an officer. How many residents have experienced the same thing? How many didn't have the power to do anything about it? He let that sink in. Officer Hayes, step forward. Hayes moved like a man walking to his execution. His legs seemed barely able to hold him. Do you have anything to say? Hayes's voice cracked. Sir, I didn't know. Didn't know I was your new chief? So if I'd been a regular citizen, it would have been acceptable? No. I made a mistake. You made a choice, Richard corrected. A choice based on prejudice and abuse of power. Now you'll face the consequences. He turned to Morrison. Captain, Officer Hayes is suspended effective immediately. We'll begin formal termination proceedings pending investigation. Hayes's knees buckled slightly. Please, Chief, I have a family. So do the people you terrorize, Richard said coldly. Should have thought about your family before you spit in a stranger's face. 2 senior officers escorted Hayes from the room. The remaining personnel sat in stunned silence. Richard continued. I know what some of you are thinking. That I'm being too harsh. That Hayes deserves a second chance. But here's the truth. Every time an officer like Hayes abuses his power, he doesn't just hurt one person. He damages trust between law enforcement and the community. He makes every good officer's job harder. He puts lives at risk. An African-American officer in the middle row raised her hand. Chief Nelson, some of us have been trying to report these issues for years. We were told to be team players, not to make waves. Richard nodded. I know, and I apologize that you weren't heard before. That changes now. If you see misconduct, you report it. If you're told to bury it, you come directly to me. Being a team player doesn't mean protecting bad cops. It means protecting the community we serve." A veteran sergeant spoke up. "What about officers who've made mistakes in the past but want to do better?" "Mistakes are one thing," Richard replied. "Patterns are another. We'll review every officer's record. Those who show willingness to learn and grow will get that opportunity. Those who show a pattern of abuse will not." He walked to the center of the room. "I didn't come here to make enemies. I came here to lead a department that serves everyone, regardless of race, class, or background. But I will not tolerate racism, abuse of power, or officers who treat their badge as a license to bully." He pulled off his hoodie, revealing a department polo underneath. "From today forward, this is a new department. We serve with honor. We protect with integrity. We treat every person with dignity. Anyone who can't do that should find another line of work." The meeting ended in somber silence. As officers filed out, several approached Richard, some to apologize for Hayes's behavior, others to share their own experiences with departmental racism. Captain Morrison waited until the room cleared. "Chief, I owe you an apology. I should have addressed these issues long before you arrived." Richard studied her. "You're right. You should have. The question is, will you help me fix them now?" Morrison straightened. "Absolutely, sir." "Good. Because we have a lot of work to do." 3 months later, the transformation was undeniable. Body cameras revealed and prevented numerous incidents of potential abuse. The review board had investigated every complaint thoroughly. Officers underwent extensive training on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and implicit bias. Some officers quit rather than adapt. Others, initially resistant, began to see the value in the new approach. Crime rates didn't rise as some had feared. They actually decreased as community trust improved. Richard stood in the same parking lot where Hayes had spit in his face, watching officers interact respectfully with citizens during a community event. Children played while parents chatted comfortably with officers who'd once been viewed with suspicion. Morrison approached. "Chief, the mayor wants to recognize you at the city council meeting. Wants to highlight the department's transformation." Richard shook his head. "This isn't about recognition. It's about doing what should have been done years ago. Still, you should take some pride in what you've accomplished." "I'll take pride when we've gone a full year without a single justified complaint. When every officer treats every citizen with respect. When parents don't have to teach their children to fear the police." He paused, watching a young black child high-five an officer. "When that's normal, not remarkable, then I'll feel proud." Morrison smiled. "For what it's worth, sir, I'm glad you came here. Even if the introduction was unconventional." Richard touched his cheek where Hayes had spit. The physical mark was long gone, but the memory remained. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. Hayes thought he was putting a black man in his place. Instead, he exposed a system that desperately needed reform. A month after the incident, Richard received a letter. It was from Derek Hayes. "Chief Nelson," it read, "I know I don't deserve your time or attention. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know that what I did that morning was the worst moment of my life. Not because I got caught, but because I finally had to confront what I'd become. I've been in therapy. I've been volunteering with community organizations. I'm trying to understand how I became someone capable of such cruelty. I'm trying to change. I know I can never undo what I did, but I hope that one day I can become someone who fights against the kind of hatred I showed you. Thank you for not destroying me completely. You showed more mercy than I deserved. Derek Hayes." Richard read the letter twice, then filed it away. Hayes's journey of redemption wasn't his concern. His job was ensuring the department never produced another officer like the man Hayes had been. But he kept the letter as a reminder. Change was possible, even for those who seemed beyond saving. The real question was whether institutions would demand that change before more people were hurt. whether leaders would have the courage to tear down broken systems instead of maintaining them. Richard had made his choice. He'd walked into that parking lot as a test subject, not knowing what he'd find. He'd discovered exactly what he'd suspected, a culture of impunity that protected abusive officers and ignored victims. But unlike those who came before him, he'd had the power to change it, and he'd used that power without hesitation. 6 months after taking office, Richard stood before a graduating class of new recruits. They were more diverse than any previous class, different races, backgrounds, experiences. "When you put on this uniform," he told them, "you're not putting on authority. You're putting on responsibility. The responsibility to protect everyone, not just those who look like you or live where you live." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You'll face situations where it's easier to make assumptions than ask questions, where prejudice whispers that someone is dangerous based on their appearance. In those moments, remember this: every person you encounter is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. They deserve your respect, not your suspicion." The recruits listened intently. This was a different kind of training than their predecessors had received. "Some of you will face officers who still cling to the old ways, who think the new policies are too soft, too politically correct. When that happens, you have a choice: be complicit in injustice or stand for what's right." He looked each recruit in the eye. "I chose to stand, even when it meant getting spit in my face, even when it meant tearing down a system that needed to fall. I hope you'll make the same choice." The applause was genuine, enthusiastic. These young officers weren't burdened by the old culture. They represented something new, a department that could actually live up to its motto: to protect and serve. Not protect some and serve others. Not protect the powerful and serve warrants to the powerless. But truly protect and serve everyone. As Richard left the ceremony, a reporter approached. "Chief Nelson, how does it feel knowing your department has become a model for police reform nationwide?" Richard smiled slightly. "Ask me again in 5 years. Real change takes time. We've started the work, but we can't declare victory yet. But surely you're proud of what you've accomplished." Richard thought about Hayes spitting in his face, about the 47 buried complaints, about all the people who'd suffered before he arrived. Pride isn't the word I'd use. Determination, maybe. Commitment to ensuring this transformation sticks. Pride comes when we've built something that can't be torn down by one bad leader or one resistant officer. He walked away, leaving the reporter to her deadline. Because Richard Nelson understood something that many leaders never learned. Real change isn't a moment or a policy. It's a constant battle against the human tendency to abuse power, to other people, to protect institutional comfort over individual justice. And that battle never truly ends. But for the first time in his career, Richard felt like he was on the winning side. Not because he'd defeated one officer or reformed one department, but because he'd shown that accountability was possible, that change could happen, that even the most broken systems could be rebuilt if someone had the courage to tear them down first. The parking lot where he'd been humiliated was now the site of weekly community meetings. The briefing room where he'd exposed Hayes now hosted discussions between officers and residents. The department that had buried complaints now investigated them thoroughly. Was it perfect? Number? Was it better? Undeniably. And that was enough to keep fighting. Because that's what real justice required. Not perfect solutions, but persistent effort. Not dramatic moments, but daily commitment to doing better. One interaction at a time. One officer at a time. One community at a time. Until the day when no one had to teach their children to fear the police. Until the day when every person could walk safely, knowing the badge meant protection, not threat. That day hadn't arrived yet. But Richard Nelson was building toward it, one reform at a time. And he wouldn't stop until he got there. Remember, change doesn't happen because of one dramatic moment. It happens because someone decides enough is enough and refuses to stop until justice is real for everyone. If this story moved you, don't just watch, act. Support police reform in your community. Demand accountability. Vote for leaders who prioritize justice over convenience. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that change is possible, but only if we fight for it. Subscribe for more real justice stories, because these aren't just tales, they're reminders of the work still ahead. Thank you for watching.